Wavelength.
It's not enough just to have women represented unless the people that are coming in bring with them values, beliefs that promote gender equality.
Sparking the conversations about Adelaide.
Talking about the importance of music, hundreds of millions of dollars that brings to the state. Why is the football allowed to happen with 15,000 people? What does that signal to us?
You should be having...
It takes one person to put their hand up and say, hey, I'm not okay, or from the inside and someone who's been through it or was going through it, and to see that there is a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel.
This is Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Welcome to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I'm your host, Jamie, and tonight I'm joined by the beautiful Cassie.
Hello.
Hello, how you doing, girl?
I'm good. How are you? How was your weekend?
It was good. I had my final show at Fringe. It's finally wrapped up. I had a couple of sold-out shows. It was amazing. I am exhausted, but it was totally worth it.
I can totally imagine.
How are you?
I'm good. I voted this weekend.
Yes.
Exciting. Democracy in work, getting my voice heard. Love it.
Absolutely. You know what? I also voted, and I've noticed that there are no democracy sausages at any of the voting booths.
That is terrible.
I felt like I was slightly robbed because I was really looking forward to going and doing my part for the people, but also getting a sausage at the end.
It's the little prize at the end.
Exactly. And I think COVID means that there's no sausages at the moment, which is really sad.
See, I'm vegetarian and gluten-free, so I've never been able to go and enjoy that, but I do like it for other people. It's a nice culture. It's a nice little...
Oh, my God. Well, they normally do vegetarian sausages too.
Oh, do they? I didn't even know.
Yeah, because I'm vegetarian as well. And I was like, I want my sausage. No innuendo there at all. Well, Fringe is wrapped up and it's been one crazy Fringe season. And I'm sad to see it go. However, we've got a great show tonight. Tonight we're talking with young people from both Russia and the Ukraine on how the Russian war is affecting locals right here in Adelaide.
We're also going to explain the ambulance ramping crisis. But next, we're talking to Teach Us Consent, the organisation that helped push mandating consent education across Australian schools.
You're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
About a month ago, ministers of education from across Australia unanimously committed to mandating holistic and age-appropriate consent education in every school, from foundation to year 10. This is a huge step in positively changing consent culture in Australia. What this means is that consent education will be added to the Australian school curriculum starting from next year. The new curriculum will incorporate consent education, including an understanding of gendered stereotypes, cohesion, and power imbalances.
One of the women behind the fight for mandating consent as a compulsory topic in the classroom is Chanel Contos. Just over a year ago, she started an Instagram poll asking her followers if they or anyone they know had been sexually assaulted by someone they went to school with. After more than 200 responded yes, she launched an online petition calling for a more holistic and earlier consent education in Australia. Teach Us Consent is an organisation that bloomed from this movement, and the petition received over 44,000 signatures and more than 6,600 people sharing their stories of sexual assault. Here's the interview.
Wavelength.
Hi, I'm Tess, and I joined the Teach Us Consent team last year, in the middle of last year, to help grow the social media arm of the campaign, which at the time was critical in propelling its success, but still is massive. It's a really engaged community of people who want to see positive change.
So explain to us, what is Teach Us Consent?
Teach Us Consent is really a call to action. It started with the goal of lobbying the Australian government to mandate consent education into the Australian curriculum, which effectively means tweaking the current sex and relationships education curriculum to include things like power imbalances, gender imbalances, and predominantly consent and the importance of that in any sexual interaction. And in the interim, we're just doing our best to provide that education before it exists.
And the story behind Teach Us Consent is pretty amazing because it started from Chanel, a young woman wanting to make a change within Australian culture. How was Teach Us Consent created after the petition launched?
It was mental. I remember so clearly seeing Chanel's personal Instagram, which at the time had a few thousand followers, and then slowly watching that grow into a website where people could sign a petition that she created to the Australian government to mandate consent education. And alongside that, she was asking people to write testimonies of their experiences with sexual assault and harassment at schools around Australia, predominantly in elite private girls and boys schools in Sydney, which is where a lot of this sexual violence seemed to be perpetrated and concentrated around. And from then, once it got attention on the national stage and the attention of the government, we sort of collated a massive team of people that worked on a pro bono basis, which was phenomenal. We've got advisors, we've got a board of directors, we've got an expert panel, and it just kind of ballooned into this big team of people working for a common goal.
God, it goes to show how influential and powerful social media can be. Did you ever expect to get such a big response from the government?
Yeah, I think that's what's so special about this movement was Chanel's palpable determination and drive to get this platformed onto the national stage and get the government's attention and ultimately their full support. Like, there was never a doubt in my mind that this was going to happen because of how much passion and expertise was behind the team as well. And I think what's really interesting is when you break down what the curriculum changes will be, they just totally align with national goals to reduce sexual violence and create a respectful society. And just like everything that is the root of the problems of sexual violence in our country is going to be addressed in the curriculum. So it seems like a no-brainer for the government to take that on.
God, you caught their attention because the Australian government has allocated a whopping $8.51 million in funding over the next 5 years to develop a suite of resources designed for children and youth of 11 to 16 on consent, and Teach Us Consent will be a part of this resource. So congratulations. What's next for Teach Us Consent?
Thank you. Yeah, that was huge news. We received that a little over a week ago. And since then, the team have been so busy and overwhelmed trying to sort of get their ducks in a row. Longer term, we're obviously going to be working with the relevant bodies to ensure that these resources and that survey that you mentioned are created and distributed in the best way with the most expert consultation possible. But in the short term, these changes aren't being made and implemented into the curriculum until 2023. So in the interim, we're just continuing to research and write really relevant and informational content to be distributed through our social media arm.
You're fighting a really incredible fight. And if people want to get more information or follow Teach Us Consent on Instagram, chuck us the handle. Where can people go?
It's literally just at Teach Us Consent. You can't miss it.
Wavelength.
Thanks for that, Tess. After the break, we talked to young people from Adelaide about how the Russian war is affecting them.
You're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. The Russian war is affecting people from all around the world, and it's affecting people right here in Adelaide. This week, Amber talked with two young individuals on how the Russian war is affecting them right from our backyard.
That's right. She talked to Anna, a young person from a Russian background, on her struggles and experiences with dealing with the devastating war.
Wavelength.
I am part Ukraine, part Russian, but the majority of me is Russian. The majority of my family lives back home in Russia. I live with my parents over here and my grandparents who migrated as well. And we've just been living in Australia since I was born, so about 21 years.
Awesome. So how has the conflict between Russia and Ukraine affected you?
Well, mainly the backhanded discrimination that my family and I received. I think a lot of people, they forget that we are not in agreement with the person who runs the government, aka Putin. So when he strikes a move, people for some reason decide to retaliate with backlash towards the Russian people, which, can be done through discriminatory comments that, my family and I have received. Because it's all we want is the same like everybody else, peace. And obviously, because my family is in Russia, business as well for them, it's really difficult because of all the sanctions. So I think it's just kind of a bit of a crisis in that sense as well. I've had like a few people message me silly things asking me to tell the government to stop invading. which is quite funny because, you know, I don't have their number and I will not, you know, like it's just dumb comments like that make absolutely no sense. But it's a bit upsetting and it hurts because it's almost like they're telling us, oh, you're kind of responsible for what's going on. So can you tell your leader to stop invading? Because, you know, you're one of them. Small comments like that I've received from, unfortunately, a lot of friends. Over time, you're like, okay, it's not funny anymore. Like, no one's laughing. Because it makes you feel like you being Russian is bad or wrong, and nothing feels worse than feeling shit about who you are as a person.
Have you been to Russia or Ukraine, and was this conflict unexpected?
I've been to Russia quite a few times, and the most recent time was 2017, and the violence that he kind of brought upon Ukraine, that was unexpected, but this whole tension between Ukraine and Russia has been brewing for a long time. It goes back years and years, like 2014 type of vibes. So none of it's new. And for example, when I went over in 2017, the tensions were pretty high at that point. There was a lot of fighting within, issues going on within the country in itself, but there wasn't something as drastic as this. So unfortunately, there's such a lack of knowledge about it. So when something like this happens, it's like, wow, oh my God, we never saw this coming. We're totally blindsided, but kind of just pay attention to different sources of media and doing your own research. You'll come to find that this has been a very long-term issue.
What can young people in Adelaide do to show more support for people in your situation?
I think just generally don't discriminate, don't attack people for the nationality, and maybe do some research as well, because I think it's really easy to hear something and then just clap back with, like these people are this, and that, but maybe just and also put yourself in that position where you wouldn't like someone coming after you for something that you have no responsibility for. Donating to Ukraine Fund is also massive because they need all of us, a big community, to just give them every single resource possible. Or, share these funding sources with whoever you can, because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, and that's just peace. To put it simply, we just want peace.
Wavelength.
Thanks for an amazing interview, Anna, and Amber, thanks for conducting it. This is a really important story because I think it shines a lot of light on the fact that Russian people that are living here are facing a lot of discrimination themselves because people are putting all this blame on them, thinking that they agree with this war in Russia, where most of the people in Russia aren't agreeing with this war. They don't agree with what Putin's doing. He's a dictator. And it's really important to be considerate of people from Russia living here and their experiences, because it's really traumatic. It's a war.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a politics student, so we learn a lot about this stuff. And I remember when I first learned it, I was like, I've never heard any of this. And exactly what Anna said, it's not spoken enough about in our media outlets in the Western world about this crisis and tension that's been between the two countries. It's insane, but it's not anything to do with the Russian people.
Totally. And it's kind of like the Asian hate crimes that were going around with COVID.
Yeah.
It's still, it's a racist undertone.
Mm-hmm.
So take the time to be considerate of people around you. If they're Russian, don't blame them for a war that's not happening to them. But a really amazing feedback from Anna and what it's like to be Russian experiencing the war from Adelaide. Thank you so much for that, Amber. Anyway, up next we've got heaps good news for you. You're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. Sometimes the news can be overwhelming. We get it. So that's why we've got some heaps good news for you this week. And Alex has gone and hit the streets interviewing people on dancing being back. Here it is.
Wavelength.
Hey, so I've got Stev, the owner of Fumo Blue here. How great is it that dancing came back last week?
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. Actually being there at midnight when the laws changed was such a great thing to see. Just everybody up and having a great time. After 2 years, it was long and, it was a long 2 years, but we got there in the end, and hopefully it's only uphill from here.
Yeah, I was there that night. It was absolutely fantastic. It was like New Year's. Everyone was just like, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? We're going to party. It was amazing. Well. Did the countdown. Footloose played. Fantastic. How do you feel about dancing being back?
I am so happy that it's back, but I'm a little bit upset that it was brought back just before the election. You know, I think if you're going to bring it back, at least bring it back when we're asking for it, not when you think it's necessary, you know?
How do you guys feel about dancing being back?
I am so happy that I can go out on the dance floor and give my best moves without it being illegal.
Wavelength.
Thanks for that, Alex. Well, I mean, dancing is back and I finally got to put my dancing shoes on over the weekend. I went out and had a big dance all night long.
As you should.
It was so fun. But get out there, support Adelaide venues, you know, support local businesses and just get out there and dance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not the best dancer, but I have been getting it on and it feels great. It feels really
does feel
nice.
good.
You go home, I'm exhausted, feeling good.
Absolutely. I'm still dusty from the weekend, actually. I think that's how hard I danced.
Maybe too many vodka Red Bulls, babe.
Hey, I am a martini lady through and through.
Classy. Up next, we are talking with Damien, a young person from Ukraine descent, on their experiences have been from Adelaide. You're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Amber chats with Damien, a young person from a Ukrainian descent, on their experience living with the effects of war on their country from Adelaide.
Wavelength.
Yeah, my name's Damien Popovich. I'm 43 years old, a Australian Ukrainian, Adelaide born and bred. I've been a real estate agent for 22 years and along with my wife Diana, we run our own real estate business here in Adelaide.
Awesome. What is your connection and history with Ukraine?
I'm a second-generation Australian Ukrainian. My mum came to Australia at the age of 6. My father was born here not long after my grandparents arrived after the Second World War. All my grandparents were displaced during the Second World War. My grandfather on my dad's side was a survivor of the Nazi concentration camp in Auschwitz. They were all from Western Ukraine. For them, going back to Ukraine after the war meant going to live under the Soviet regime. And they, like so many Europeans, I guess, were brave enough to start a new life on the other side of the world and lucky enough to come to a country like Australia.
How has it been maintaining contact with loved ones in Ukraine?
Today, much easier than it was years ago under the Soviet Union. I mean, I remember as a kid my dad speaking with his cousins. You'd always have to watch what you said on the phone because there was always some Soviet authority listening on the other side of the line. But after Ukraine's renewed independence in 91, it certainly became easier. The Russian invasion, we've been fairly lucky. Those communication channels to Ukraine haven't been blocked or stopped or interrupted. We still keep in touch through Facebook and see their posts and see what they're going through. And it's quite interesting. You sort of get a bird's eye view of what's going on or an on-the-ground view, with the footage that they're sharing, things that they see, their experiences.
So do you wish that the Australian public was more informed on the tension between the two countries?
God, I think history is being taught less and less, and as we get further away from the big events of last century, people are forgetting and not being taught. But what many Australians don't know is that for Ukraine and Ukrainians, this war started in 2014 when Russia sent its soldiers to Crimea. They still illegally occupy there today. Then they shot down flight MH17, which killed 230-odd people, including Australians. And I think it's important for Australians to realise that for Ukraine, we've been fighting Russian forces on our own territory since 2014. And, in the current crisis now, in this war in Ukraine, Poland and its people have been the biggest supporters of Ukraine. The help that they've extended towards refugees has been unbelievable. And I think it's something that no Ukrainian will ever forget. And the media has certainly helped in that coverage, especially when it comes to highlighting the humanitarian impact. 2.5 million refugees have lost their homes or been forced to flee their homes in the last 3 weeks, and helping us realise that these families are going to need help just to survive.
What has support for Ukrainians look like in South Australia and how can it improve?
Support has been great. Around the country it's been outstanding. In South Australia it's been really good. We're not a huge Ukrainian community here, but I think most would agree with me when I say this. The support has been overwhelming. About 2 weeks ago we had a march in protest of this invasion and there were over 2,500 people there. Ukrainians, Poles, Croatians, Lithuanians, many other cultures. Again, this sort of helps to raise people's awareness. Different Ukrainian community groups have been raising funds to help all these displaced peoples through the Ukraine Crisis Appeal. And the response from the wider South Australian community has been excellent. So many people have made donations. It's been really heartwarming to see. In 2 weeks, we're holding a Ukraine aid dinner to raise funds for the Ukraine Crisis Appeal at the Lakes Hotel at West Lakes. We sold out 250 tickets last Friday in 30 hours. And that was all through a couple of posts on Facebook. So we could have sold 200 more. People have been that willing to help. And And I think that really says a lot about the South Australian people and the communities that we have here. So it's been really heartwarming and reassuring to see, and everyone wants to do their part to help. And they can go to www.ukrainecrisisappeal.org. So all those funds go towards helping the refugees and humanitarian aid for people that have been displaced. This war that's happened in the last 2 weeks, it certainly shocked the world, but I'm sure I can speak for a lot of Ukrainians. It certainly shocked us and saddened us. We worry for our family. Russia's bombing civilian areas, so we worry about, family being caught up in that. We worry for our culture and the survival of our history in all the bombings. But I think when all this is over, yes, for this bravery and defiance that they've shown in this time, which I think has astonished and inspired a lot of people around the world. But I think Ukrainians will want to be known not for this war, but for who we are.
Wavelength.
Thanks for that, Damien, for that absolutely incredible interview and heartbreaking story. Thank you for sharing your experience on the Russian war. And look, it's kind of hard to know what we can do from here, right? But there are a lot of organisations that we can get behind. We can donate money and just help people over in the Ukraine that need our help, need our resources, need our funds. There's a lot of places you can go to support. You can go to the Ukrainian crisisappeal.org. You can go to the UNICEF website, www.unicef.org.au. You can go to razom4ukraine.org. There's a few places. So go and donate some money, your coffee money.
You can. Yeah, absolutely. I was just telling Jamie before, I saw that people have been renting Airbnbs in Ukraine it's pretty cheap compared to obviously Airbnbs in Australia, but so that people can hold refugees in their Airbnbs but still getting money directly to the Ukrainian people. And I think that's really special that people are really coming around and supporting this,
Absolutely. Let's band together and do the help we can, If you don't have your coffee for the day, you'll survive. Anyway, up next, Wavelength explains what ramping is and how it's affecting our ambulance drivers around Adelaide. You're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. So there's been an ambulance crisis in Adelaide, where the phrase ramping has been thrown around all over the media. Cassie explains what ramping is and how it's affecting our healthcare system in Adelaide.
Wavelength.
Ramping. It's not new, and most likely you've heard the word either said on the news or thrown around at the recent state election. But what actually is ramping? Well, essentially, ramping is putting the responsibility of care onto paramedics rather than the emergency department due to lack of staff or beds in hospitals. Like I said, it's not new, but with good old COVID putting enormous strain onto our healthcare sector, the issue has become deadly. It's important to mention, COVID did not invent ramping. This has been around way before the dreaded spicy cough. But like a lot of issues, COVID has only highlighted the crisis. Now, why is this such an issue? You might be thinking to yourself, paramedics and medical professionals as well. Surely they can help people in ambulances. And the short answer is yes, they actually already do. However, ambulances are not designed to have patients in them for 5 to 10 hours, which creates a big risk for patients as they frankly do not have the supplies to fully support and care for someone. That's why there is an emergency department. Data released by the SA Ambulance Service shows that crew and patients have spent over 2,281 hours on ramps alone in the past month. That's 95 days combined, and over 3 days for each ambulance in SA alone. The government has responded to this by agreeing to add 74 more paramedics to the workforce, but not everybody is happy. The Ambulance Employees Association says an extra 300 workers is what is needed to alleviate the issue. Sadly, it's not just a quick fix. It's not just the lack of paramedics and ambulances in SA, it's the lack of beds and emergency staff to care for those patients. You might be sitting there feeling scared, overwhelmed and unable to help, and to be honest, same. The most we can do at the moment is write into politicians and put pressure on them to add funding and workers. Make sure that you vote in the federal election and get your voice heard. Be nice to healthcare workers and make sure you only call the emergency department when you really need it.
Wavelength.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Cassie. That was amazing. So there's a lot to unpack with the whole ramping crisis. But what you said, we need more workers, right? We need more workers in the field. They need at least 300 more workers, but we also need more emergency beds.
Yeah.
Like we need more beds in the hospitals, right? We need more government support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think personally, I'm not sure how we haven't gotten that already. I mean, COVID has exacerbated this issue, but we didn't have COVID like crazily until about last year, the end of last year. We had 2 years from when COVID first hit to make sure that our medical staff and our hospitals are ready for it. And it just seems like we're not doing that. And it's really terrifying.
Totally.
For everyone, not just people who have got COVID, people with mental health issues, people who just, have a heart attack or any kind of issues like that. It's terrifying.
Totally. And you can see, protests happening like from paramedics all around Adelaide. Like you can see when you see the ambulance cars driving, they're riding on their like vehicles that they need support. They're like, SA needs, they're screaming for help. And what I found interesting, one of my roommates is a nurse and we were talking about this issue in particular. Paramedics is one of the hardest things you can get into in uni. You need like a 98 or 99 ATAR. Yeah. And I feel like if we need more, paramedics in the field, maybe they need to make it more accessible and easier to get into uni.
Yeah, 100%. And I did see a statistic a couple of days ago saying that 50% of people that graduate paramedics are getting jobs, like 50%. This could be solved.
Totally. It's the same as like, because the ATAR is a lot lower for nurses to come in because the government wanted to get more people coming into the healthcare industry and to get nurses involved. Same with paramedics. Like, why don't we set more people up to succeed instead of knocking people down to fail?
Yeah, 100%. And I think just also like being really grateful for our healthcare workers as well. I think COVID has really shown that our essential workers are so essential to our life, especially healthcare workers.
Totally.
And they're still really struggling. Like even though we can dance and we've got majority of our rights back, they're still in crisis. This is still a massive issue.
Totally. Just shout out to all the healthcare workers out there. You guys are gods. Anyway, now we're getting right back into the music. You're listening to Wavelength.
Wavelength.
And that brings us to the end of the show tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening.
Make sure you're subscribed to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. You can listen back to our old episodes right now, and you'll be the first one to know when tonight's episode goes up.
Well, thanks for joining me tonight, Cassie. I always love your company and your chats.
I love you too. Look at that.
I know, it's so fun. Back behind the mic and it's feeling good.
It does very feel good.
But thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll be back next week with an amazing episode to explain what's going on around Adelaide. Don't go anywhere though, because up next you've got Deep with Easy G. You're listening to Fresh.
You're listening to Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.